It was 11:47 p.m. when my husband Marcus walked out of the emergency veterinary clinic and drove away, leaving me stranded with Luna, our dying tabby cat, and a $4,000 emergency bill I could not pay. 3 years later, when he saw me walk into that same clinic flanked by two attorneys from the animal rights legal foundation I had built from nothing, his face turned white as hospital sheets. What happened between those two moments changed not only my life, but the lives of countless animals who had no voice, no advocate, and no hope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Vasquez, and this is the story of how my lowest moment became the catalyst for creating something larger than I ever thought possible. It is the story of how abandonment taught me self-reliance, how crisis revealed hidden strength, and how love for one small creature grew into a mission that would touch thousands of lives. But most importantly, it is the story of discovering that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who push us toward our true purpose. The emergency began on a Thursday evening in November 2019. I had been working late at the accounting firm where I managed payroll for small businesses, a steady but unremarkable job that paid enough to cover my half of our household expenses. The work was routine, involving spreadsheets and calculations that required attention to detail but offered little intellectual stimulation or personal fulfillment. I had been performing similar duties for 6 years, ever since graduating from community college with an associate degree in business administration. Marcus arrived home before me, as he usually did. His position as a sales manager for a regional electronics distributor allowed him flexible hours and considerable autonomy, advantages he frequently mentioned when discussing our respective career trajectories. He possessed natural charisma and communication skills that made him effective in client relationships, though he tended to view his professional success as evidence of superior capability rather than fortunate alignment between his talents and his chosen field. When I entered our duplex apartment in suburban Phoenix, I immediately sensed something was amiss. Marcus was pacing in the living room, his expression combining irritation with something approaching panic. Luna, our 3-year-old tabby cat, was lying motionless on her favorite blanket beside the couch, her breathing shallow and labored. "Finally," Marcus said when he saw me, "something is seriously wrong with that cat. She has been like this for 2 hours, and I did not know what to do." I knelt beside Luna and gently touched her fur, which felt unusually warm. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and she made no response to my voice or touch. Even in my limited experience with pet care, I recognized signs of serious illness that required immediate professional attention. "We need to take her to the emergency vet," I said, already moving toward the closet where we kept Luna's carrier. Marcus followed me, his agitation becoming more pronounced. "Do you know how much emergency vets charge? We are talking about hundreds of dollars, maybe more, for a cat that probably just ate something wrong." The comment revealed an attitude toward Luna that had become increasingly apparent over the past year. When we had adopted her as a kitten, Marcus had been enthusiastic about pet ownership, viewing it as a milestone of adult responsibility and domestic stability. However, his interest had waned as the realities of pet care became routine rather than novelty. Luna had transformed from an appealing addition to our household into an expense and responsibility that he increasingly resented. My relationship with Luna had evolved in the opposite direction. Initially, I had agreed to pet adoption primarily to please Marcus, despite having limited experience with animals. However, caring for Luna had awakened something in me that I had not previously recognized. Her complete dependence on us for food, shelter, medical care, and companionship had created a sense of responsibility that felt both weighty and meaningful, in ways my professional duties never had. "She is not just sick, Marcus. Look at her breathing. Something is seriously wrong," I insisted while preparing the carrier. He stood in the doorway, making no effort to assist with the preparations. "Elena, be realistic. How much are you willing to spend on a cat? $500? $1,000? Where does it end?" The question revealed the fundamental difference in how we viewed Luna and our responsibility toward her. Marcus had begun treating pet ownership as a cost-benefit analysis, where Luna's value had to be justified against the expense of her care. For me, the decision was not economic but moral. Luna depended on us completely, and that dependence created obligations that transcended financial considerations. "We will figure out the money," I said, gently placing Luna in the carrier despite her weak attempts to resist. "Right now, she needs help." The drive to the emergency veterinary clinic took 23 minutes through late-evening Phoenix traffic. Marcus drove while maintaining a stream of commentary about the cost of emergency veterinary care, the questionable value of expensive treatments for pets, and his belief that people who spent large amounts on animal medical care had misplaced priorities. "I am not saying we should not help her," he clarified during one of his monologues, "but we need to be reasonable about this. There has to be a limit to what makes sense financially." I sat in the passenger seat with Luna's carrier on my lap, feeling her labored breathing through the plastic mesh and listening to Marcus establish the framework for abandoning her if treatment costs exceeded his personal threshold. The conversation revealed aspects of his character that I had not previously recognized, or perhaps had chosen not to acknowledge. The Palo Verde Animal Emergency Center occupied a modern building designed specifically for 24-hour veterinary care. The waiting area featured comfortable seating, calming colors, and information displays about various pet health topics. Despite the late hour, several other pet owners sat with carriers and leashes, their expressions reflecting the same mixture of concern and anxiety that I was experiencing. The intake process involved detailed questions about Luna's symptoms, medical history, and recent behavior. The veterinary technician who conducted the initial examination was thorough and professional, explaining each step of the assessment while handling Luna with gentle competence that immediately put me at ease. "We need to run some diagnostic tests to determine what is causing her symptoms," the technician explained after completing the physical examination. "Blood work, X-rays, and possibly an ultrasound, depending on what we find initially." Marcus asked the question I had been dreading. "What is this going to cost?" The technician provided an estimate range of $1,500 to $4,000, depending on the diagnosis and required treatment. The amount was substantial, representing nearly 2 months of my take-home pay and far exceeding our emergency savings account. Marcus's response was immediate and definitive. "That is completely unreasonable for a cat. There has to be less expensive options." The technician explained that Luna's symptoms suggested serious internal problems that required immediate diagnostic attention and potentially emergency surgery. Delaying treatment could result in permanent damage or death, while less comprehensive diagnostic approaches might miss critical issues that would be more expensive to address later. "I understand the cost is significant," she said with practiced empathy, "but Luna's condition appears to be quite serious. The diagnostic tests will help us determine exactly what we are dealing with and what treatment options are available." Marcus turned to me with an expression that combined frustration with something approaching anger. "Elena, you heard what she said. We are talking about thousands of dollars for a cat. That is not responsible financial planning." The waiting room suddenly felt very quiet, despite the presence of other pet owners and staff members. I realized that other people were observing our conversation, and I felt embarrassed by Marcus's focus on cost rather than Luna's welfare. More importantly, I recognized that we were approaching a decision point that would reveal fundamental differences in our values and priorities. "She is our responsibility," I said quietly, hoping to avoid creating a scene that would disturb other families dealing with their own pet emergencies. "We adopted her, and now she is depending on us to take care of her." Marcus stood up and walked toward the exit, gesturing for me to follow. "We need to discuss this privately." In the parking lot, under the harsh illumination of security lights, Marcus presented his position with the directness he typically reserved for difficult sales negotiations. He was not willing to spend thousands of dollars on veterinary care for a cat, regardless of the severity of her condition. He viewed such expenditure as financially irresponsible and emotionally excessive, reflecting misplaced priorities that prioritized an animal over practical considerations. "If you want to go through with this," he said, "you are on your own. I am not participating in throwing away our money on something this ridiculous." The ultimatum forced me to choose between Luna's welfare and Marcus's approval, between my growing sense of responsibility toward a helpless creature and my desire to maintain harmony in my marriage. The decision should have been difficult, but it was not. Looking at Luna's carrier in my hands, feeling her labored breathing and seeing her dulled eyes, I knew that I could not abandon her to save money, or avoid conflict. "Then I will handle it myself," I replied. Marcus appeared surprised by my response, as if he had expected his ultimatum to convince me to abandon Luna rather than to abandon his position. "Elena, be realistic. You cannot afford this on your own. Your salary barely covers your personal expenses." He was correct about my financial limitations, but he was incorrect about my determination. "I will figure it out." Marcus shook his head with the expression of someone dealing with an unreasonable person who refused to acknowledge obvious facts. "Fine. But I am not waiting around here all night for you to learn an expensive lesson about fiscal responsibility. Call me when you are ready to be picked up." He walked to his car without looking back, started the engine, and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with a dying cat and no transportation home. The abandonment was both practical and symbolic, representing his withdrawal of support for a decision he disapproved of while forcing me to handle the consequences entirely on my own. I stood there for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. My husband of 4 years had driven away rather than support me during a crisis involving a creature we had both committed to care for. The action revealed aspects of his character that fundamentally challenged my understanding of our relationship and his commitment to shared responsibilities. More immediately, his departure created practical problems that required immediate solutions. I had no way to pay for Luna's treatment, no transportation home after the treatment was completed, and no clear plan for managing the situation Marcus had forced me to handle alone. But as I walked back into the emergency clinic with Luna's carrier, I felt something that surprised me: relief. Marcus's absence eliminated the pressure of his disapproval and allowed me to focus entirely on Luna's needs without having to justify or defend my decisions. For the first time in our relationship, I was free to act according to my own values and judgment without considering his opinions or reactions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The veterinary technician who had conducted Luna's initial examination was waiting when I returned to the intake area. "Have you decided how you would like to proceed?" she asked. "Run all the tests she needs," I replied without hesitation. "I will find a way to handle the cost." Over the next 6 hours, I learned more about veterinary medicine, animal welfare, and my own capabilities than I had discovered in the previous 4 years of marriage. Luna's diagnostic tests revealed a severe intestinal blockage caused by ingesting a small toy that had lodged in her digestive system. The condition required immediate surgery to prevent life-threatening complications, but the prognosis for complete recovery was excellent if treatment was provided promptly. The surgical procedure took 2 hours and 47 minutes. I spent that time in the waiting area, surrounded by other pet owners who were dealing with their own emergencies. The conversations I overheard revealed a community of people who shared similar values about their responsibilities toward animals, and who were willing to make significant financial sacrifices to ensure their pets received necessary medical care. One woman was waiting while her elderly dog underwent treatment for a condition that would require ongoing medication for the remainder of his life. Another man had driven 3 hours with his cat to reach the emergency clinic, after their local veterinary practice had determined that the required treatment exceeded their capabilities. A teenage girl sat with her parents, all of them maintaining vigil, while their rabbit underwent surgery for injuries sustained in an accident. These people came from different backgrounds and economic circumstances, but they shared a commitment to their animals that transcended cost-benefit analysis. They had accepted responsibility for creatures who depended on them completely, and they were willing to make personal sacrifices to honor that responsibility. During those hours in the waiting room, I began to understand that my response to Luna's crisis was not emotionally excessive or financially irresponsible, as Marcus had suggested. Instead, it reflected values and priorities that were shared by many people who recognized that caring for dependent creatures creates moral obligations that cannot be reduced to simple economic calculations. When the surgeon informed me that Luna's operation had been successful and that her prognosis for complete recovery was excellent, I felt a satisfaction that was deeper than relief. I had made a difficult decision under pressure, handled a crisis without support, and achieved a positive outcome through my own determination and resource management. The total cost of Luna's treatment was $3,847, an amount that exceeded my available savings and required me to arrange a payment plan with the veterinary clinic. However, the financial burden felt manageable compared to the alternative of allowing Luna to suffer or die because I had been unwilling to accept responsibility for her welfare. At 6:23 a.m., I called Marcus to inform him that Luna's surgery had been successful and to request transportation home. His response revealed annoyance rather than relief, focusing on the cost of treatment rather than the positive outcome. "I hope you realize what you just committed us to financially," he said when he arrived at the clinic. $3,800 for a cat surgery. That money could have been used for things that actually matter. The comment crystallized my growing understanding that Marcus and I held fundamentally incompatible views about responsibility, compassion, and what constitutes meaningful expenditure. More troubling was his use of us to describe financial consequences of a decision he had refused to support, suggesting that he expected to benefit from shared resources while avoiding shared responsibilities. During the drive home, Luna rested peacefully in her carrier, her breathing normal for the first time in nearly 8 hours. The surgery had been completely successful, and her recovery was expected to proceed without complications. Looking at her sleeping form, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely separate from Marcus's disapproval or support. That morning marked the beginning of my transformation from someone who sought approval for her decisions to someone who trusted her own judgment and accepted responsibility for the consequences. Marcus's abandonment at the veterinary clinic had forced me to discover capabilities I had not known I possessed, while revealing character traits in him that I could no longer ignore or rationalize. More significantly, the experience had introduced me to a community of people who shared my values about animal welfare and who were willing to make personal sacrifices to protect creatures who could not protect themselves. This community would become increasingly important as I began to recognize that my response to Luna's crisis was not an isolated incident, but rather the beginning of a deeper commitment to animal advocacy and protection. Over the following weeks, as Luna recovered completely from her surgery and returned to her normal activity level, I began researching animal welfare issues and discovering the extent of suffering that occurs when animals lack effective advocates. The knowledge was disturbing but also motivating, suggesting possibilities for contribution that had never occurred to me during my years of routine accounting work. Marcus's reaction to Luna's successful recovery was minimal acknowledgement, coupled with continued resentment about the cost of her treatment. He made frequent comments about the money that had been wasted on veterinary bills, despite the obvious evidence that the expenditure had saved Luna's life and restored her to perfect health. These comments revealed that his objection had not been based on reasonable concern about our financial situation, but rather on fundamental disagreement about Luna's value and our obligations toward her. The realization forced me to confront uncomfortable questions about our compatibility and shared values that I had previously avoided addressing. The veterinary emergency had created a crisis that revealed character traits in both Marcus and myself that had not been apparent during our ordinary daily interactions. Under pressure, he had chosen self-interest over shared responsibility, while I had discovered reserves of determination and capability that surprised me. More importantly, the experience had introduced me to my true priorities and values, which differed significantly from the conventional expectations that had guided my previous decisions about career, relationships, and life goals. Luna's crisis had awakened something in me that would not be satisfied with returning to previous patterns of accommodation and compromise. The woman who had stood in that veterinary parking lot at midnight, abandoned by her husband and facing a crisis she had no clear way to handle, was beginning to disappear. In her place was emerging someone who trusted her own judgment, accepted difficult responsibilities, and recognized that some values are worth defending regardless of cost or convenience. This transformation was just beginning on that November night, but the foundation was established. Over the next 3 years, that foundation would support the development of capabilities and accomplishments that would have seemed impossible to imagine during those frightening hours in the emergency clinic. The woman who would eventually return to that clinic, flanked by attorneys, was already beginning to emerge, even though she did not yet know where her journey would lead. Luna's recovery was complete within 6 weeks, leaving her with only a small scar as evidence of her ordeal. However, My recovery from Marcus's abandonment would take much longer and would ultimately lead me toward a future I had never previously considered. The dying cat who had created our crisis would become the catalyst for transformation that would affect thousands of other animals and their human advocates. But all of that remained ahead of us as Luna settled into her post-surgical routine, and I began to process the implications of what had occurred during those crucial hours when everything changed. The weeks following Luna's surgery created an unexpected tension in our household that manifested in subtle but persistent ways. Marcus's resentment about the veterinary expenses colored his interactions with both Luna and me, creating an atmosphere where my decision to prioritize her welfare was treated as an ongoing source of conflict rather than a resolved issue. His comments about the cost became more frequent and pointed, suggesting that my choice represented a fundamental flaw in judgment that called into question my ability to make reasonable decisions about our shared resources and priorities. This constant criticism forced me to defend a decision that I increasingly viewed as morally obvious, rather than financially questionable. The disconnect between my growing confidence in the rightness of my choice and Marcus's persistent disapproval created cognitive dissonance that I found increasingly difficult to tolerate. More troubling was my recognition that his objections revealed character traits that extended beyond this specific incident to encompass broader attitudes about responsibility, compassion, and the value of living beings who could not advocate for themselves. During Luna's recovery period, I found myself spending considerable time researching animal welfare issues that had never previously captured my attention. The initial research began as an attempt to better understand pet health and care, ensuring that I would be better prepared to recognize symptoms and provide appropriate care in the future. However, the information I discovered revealed a vast landscape of animal suffering that existed largely outside public awareness and regulatory oversight. The statistics were overwhelming in their scope and disturbing in their implications. Millions of animals in commercial breeding facilities, factory farms, research laboratories, and entertainment industries experienced conditions that would be considered criminal abuse if applied to humans. These animals possessed the same capacity for pain, fear, and suffering as Luna, yet they lacked effective legal protection or advocacy systems that could address their circumstances. The research revealed that animal welfare law was an emerging field that combined legal expertise with scientific knowledge about animal cognition and behavior. Attorneys who specialized in this area worked to establish and enforce legal protections for animals, challenged institutional practices that caused unnecessary suffering, and developed frameworks for recognizing animal interests within legal systems that had traditionally treated them as property rather than sentient beings. This discovery was revelatory because it suggested possibilities for meaningful work that aligned with the values I had discovered during Luna's crisis. The field offered opportunities to apply analytical and organizational skills to address problems that mattered deeply to me, while contributing to systemic change that could benefit millions of animals who lacked effective advocates. The realization that animal welfare law existed as a legitimate career path created excitement that I had never experienced in my accounting work. For the first time since college, I found myself genuinely interested in learning about a professional field and eager to explore possibilities for involvement and contribution. The enthusiasm was energizing in ways that made me recognize how little intellectual stimulation my current work provided. However, pursuing expertise in animal welfare law would require substantial time, financial investment, and educational development that seemed incompatible with my current circumstances. Marcus had made clear his disapproval of significant expenditures on animal-related causes, and my accounting salary provided limited resources for additional education or career transition. The practical barriers appeared formidable, suggesting that my interest might remain theoretical rather than actionable. Nevertheless, I began taking small steps toward deeper involvement in animal advocacy. I volunteered with a local animal shelter on weekends, initially helping with basic tasks like cleaning kennels and socializing animals who were awaiting adoption. The work was physically demanding and emotionally challenging, as it involved daily exposure to animals who had been abandoned, abused, or surrendered by families who could no longer care for them. The volunteer experience provided direct contact with the consequences of inadequate animal protection systems. Many of the animals at the shelter had suffered neglect or abuse that could have been prevented through more effective enforcement of existing laws, or through stronger legal frameworks that recognized animal welfare as a legitimate public concern. The staff members were dedicated and compassionate, but they were overwhelmed by the volume of animals requiring assistance and constrained by limited resources and legal authorities. Working at the shelter also introduced me to other volunteers who shared similar concerns about animal welfare and who were pursuing various approaches to address systemic problems. Some focused on education and public awareness campaigns designed to change attitudes about animal treatment. Others worked on legislative initiatives to strengthen legal protections or improve enforcement mechanisms. Several volunteers had professional backgrounds in law, veterinary medicine, or policy development that enabled more sophisticated advocacy efforts. One volunteer who particularly influenced my thinking was Dr. Sarah Chen, a retired veterinarian who had spent 30 years treating both companion animals and livestock. Her experience had provided comprehensive understanding of animal welfare issues across different contexts, from pet overpopulation and inadequate veterinary care to industrial farming practices and wildlife conservation challenges. Dr. Chen had become involved in animal advocacy after retiring from clinical practice, using her professional expertise to support legal challenges against institutions that failed to provide appropriate animal care. She worked with attorneys who specialized in animal welfare law, providing scientific expertise about animal behavior and physiology that supported their legal arguments and policy recommendations. The field needs people who understand both the legal system and animal welfare science, Dr. Chen explained during one of our conversations at the shelter. Most attorneys do not have sufficient background in animal behavior and veterinary medicine to develop effective legal strategies, while most veterinarians and animal scientists lack legal training that would enable them to work within regulatory and judicial systems. Her observation highlighted the interdisciplinary nature of effective animal advocacy and suggested opportunities for individuals who could bridge different areas of expertise. The combination of legal knowledge, scientific understanding, and practical experience with animal welfare issues created value that was rare and highly sought after within advocacy organizations and law firms that specialized in this field. Dr. Chen's career trajectory also demonstrated that meaningful work in animal advocacy was achievable through strategic skill development and gradual transition rather than dramatic career abandonment. She had maintained her veterinary practice while developing expertise in legal and policy issues, eventually transitioning to full-time advocacy after establishing credibility and financial stability that supported the change. The conversations with Dr. Chen and other experienced volunteers provided practical guidance about pathways toward professional involvement in animal advocacy. Several suggested that paralegal training could provide legal knowledge that would be immediately applicable to animal welfare cases, while requiring less time and financial investment than law school. Others recommended courses in animal behavior, veterinary science, or public policy that would provide scientific foundation for advocacy work. The educational options created possibilities for gradual skill development that could be pursued while maintaining my current employment, avoiding the financial risk of immediate career transition while building capabilities that might eventually support different work. The approach appealed to my practical nature and seemed more realistic than dramatic changes that would require Marcus's support and approval. I enrolled in evening paralegal courses at Phoenix Community College, beginning with Introduction to Legal Systems and Research Methods. The decision represented my first significant educational investment since completing my business degree 6 years earlier, and the first educational choice I had made based on personal interest rather than practical necessity or external expectations. The paralegal coursework was intellectually challenging in ways that reminded me why I had initially enjoyed academic learning during high school and college. The legal concepts required analytical thinking and systematic reasoning that engaged cognitive abilities I had not used regularly in my accounting work. More importantly, the knowledge was directly relevant to issues I cared about deeply, creating motivation for learning that was intrinsically rewarding rather than merely instrumental. Marcus's reaction to my enrollment was predictably negative. He viewed the paralegal courses as another unnecessary expenditure related to my obsession with animal issues, and questioned whether the time and money invested in legal education would produce practical benefits for our household finances or future planning. "You already have a degree and a steady job," he pointed out when I explained my educational goals. "Why do you need more school for something that is just a hobby?" His characterization of animal advocacy as a hobby, rather than a potential career path, revealed fundamental misunderstanding of both my interests and the professional opportunities available in this field. More troubling was his assumption that my educational and career choices should be evaluated primarily based on their contribution to our household, rather than their personal meaning or professional development value for me individually. The conversation highlighted growing tension between my expanding interests and Marcus's expectations about my priorities and commitments. He had become accustomed to my accommodation of his preferences and seemed unprepared for my development of independent goals that might not align with his vision for our shared future. Despite his disapproval, I continued with the paralegal coursework and volunteer work at the animal shelter. The combination of formal legal education and practical experience with animal welfare issues provided comprehensive foundation for understanding how legal systems could be used to protect animals and address institutional practices that caused unnecessary suffering. The paralegal courses covered civil procedure, legal research and writing, evidence law, and specialized areas including environmental law and regulatory compliance. The curriculum provided tools for understanding how legal arguments are constructed, how regulatory systems operate, and how advocacy organizations can use courts and administrative agencies to achieve policy changes. The knowledge was immediately applicable to situations I encountered through volunteer work at the shelter. Many animal welfare issues involved complex interactions between local ordinances, state regulations, and federal laws that required legal expertise to navigate effectively. Understanding these systems enabled more sophisticated advocacy approaches that addressed root causes rather than merely responding to immediate crises. For example, the shelter regularly received animals from commercial breeding operations that maintained conditions barely sufficient to avoid legal penalties while providing inadequate socialization, veterinary care, and living environments for the animals in their custody. Traditional approaches focused on rescuing individual animals after problems developed, but legal advocacy could address the regulatory frameworks that allowed such operations to continue functioning. The paralegal training provided skills for researching applicable laws, documenting regulatory violations, and preparing materials that attorneys could use to challenge inadequate enforcement or pursue stronger protective standards. This systematic approach offered possibilities for preventing animal suffering, rather than merely responding to it after it occurred. My growing expertise in animal welfare law began attracting attention from other volunteers and staff members at the shelter, who started consulting me about legal questions related to their advocacy work. The requests were initially simple queries about adoption procedures or licensing requirements, but they gradually expanded to include more complex issues involving animal seizures, cruelty investigations, and regulatory compliance. The consulting requests created opportunities to apply my developing legal knowledge to real situations while providing valuable service to the animal welfare community. The work was intellectually stimulating and emotionally rewarding in ways that my accounting job had never been, suggesting possibilities for professional transition that might provide both personal fulfillment and adequate financial compensation. Dr. Chen introduced me to several attorneys who specialized in animal welfare law, including Maria Rodriguez, who had established a small practice focused exclusively on animal protection cases. Maria's work involved representing animal welfare organizations in regulatory disputes, pursuing cruelty prosecutions, and developing legal strategies for challenging institutional practices that caused animal suffering. "The field is growing rapidly," Maria explained during our initial meeting, "but we need more people with both legal training and practical understanding of animal welfare issues. Most law school graduates have limited knowledge about animal behavior, veterinary science, or the institutional systems that affect animal treatment." She offered me a part-time position as a paralegal in her practice, providing opportunities to gain professional experience in animal welfare law while completing my formal education. The position would involve legal research, document preparation, case management, and client communication, with particular focus on cases involving companion animal welfare and regulatory enforcement. The job offer represented validation of the skills I had developed through volunteer work and formal education, while providing a pathway toward professional involvement in animal advocacy. The compensation was modest compared to my accounting salary, but the work offered intellectual challenge and personal meaning that made financial considerations secondary to professional development opportunities. However, accepting Maria's offer would require reducing my hours at the accounting firm, creating income reduction that Marcus would certainly oppose. The decision forced me to choose between financial security and professional fulfillment, between maintaining household harmony and pursuing work that aligned with my values and interests. The choice was complicated by my recognition that animal welfare law represented more than career transition for me. It was becoming central to my identity and sense of purpose in ways that suggested permanent commitment rather than temporary exploration. The work connected to values and priorities that had emerged during Luna's crisis, and had continued developing through my volunteer experiences and educational pursuits. After considerable reflection, I decided to accept Maria's position and reduce my accounting hours to part-time status. The decision represented my first major life choice that prioritized personal fulfillment over financial optimization, and my first professional commitment that Marcus actively opposed rather than supported. His reaction was immediate and intense. He viewed my decision as evidence of poor judgment and misplaced priorities that threatened our financial stability and future planning. More fundamentally, he seemed to interpret my choice as rejection of the lifestyle and values that had guided our relationship, suggesting that my commitment to animal advocacy represented abandonment of our shared goals and responsibilities. The conflict revealed that our relationship had been based partly on assumptions about my willingness to accommodate his preferences and priorities, even when they conflicted with my own interests and values. My development of independent goals and commitments challenged these assumptions in ways that created tension he was unprepared to manage constructively. Nevertheless, I began working with Maria Rodriguez while continuing my paralegal education and volunteer activities at the animal shelter. The combination provided comprehensive preparation for professional work in animal welfare law, while demonstrating that career transitions could be managed gradually through strategic skill development and careful planning. The work with Maria's practice was intellectually demanding and emotionally rewarding, in ways that confirmed my intuition about the alignment between animal welfare law and my personal values and professional interests. Each case involved complex legal analysis combined with practical problem-solving that required both analytical skills and compassionate understanding of animal welfare issues. More importantly, the work provided opportunities to achieve meaningful outcomes for animals who had no other advocates. Successful cases resulted in improved conditions for animals, stronger enforcement of protective regulations, and precedents that could benefit countless other animals in similar situations. The transition from accounting to animal welfare law was challenging and required significant personal and professional adjustments. However, the work provided intellectual stimulation, emotional satisfaction, and sense of purpose that had been absent from my previous career. For the first time since college, I felt genuinely excited about my professional development and optimistic about future possibilities. Luna's recovery had been complete for several months, leaving her healthy and active with no lasting effects from her surgical experience. However, the crisis had catalyzed changes in my life that continued expanding and deepening as I discovered the vast world of animal advocacy and protection law. The woman who had been abandoned in that veterinary parking lot was developing capabilities and commitments that would have been inconceivable during those frightening hours when everything seemed hopeless. The foundation for transformation had been established through crisis, but the construction of new identity and purpose was occurring through deliberate choices about education, work, and relationships. Each decision moved me further away from the accommodating partner who had prioritized harmony over authenticity, and closer to someone who trusted her own judgment and accepted responsibility for creating the life she wanted to live. Working with Maria Rodriguez's law practice provided intensive education in animal welfare law that supplemented my formal paralegal training with practical experience in complex case management and advocacy strategy. Maria's approach to legal practice was both rigorous and innovative, combining traditional legal research methods with cutting-edge scientific understanding of animal cognition and behavior. Her cases ranged from straightforward companion animal custody disputes to sophisticated regulatory challenges against large-scale commercial operations that affected thousands of animals. The first major case I worked on involved a puppy mill operation in rural Arizona that housed over 300 dogs in conditions that violated multiple state regulations governing commercial breeding facilities. The operation had managed to avoid significant penalties despite repeated citations because the regulatory framework contained loopholes that allowed minimal compliance with technical requirements while permitting conditions that caused substantial animal suffering. My role in the case involved conducting comprehensive legal research to identify all applicable regulations, documenting violations through photographic evidence and veterinary assessments, and preparing detailed case files that supported Maria's legal arguments. The work required meticulous attention to detail and systematic organization of complex information, skills that transferred directly from my accounting background while serving a much more meaningful purpose. The research process revealed the extent to which animal welfare law requires interdisciplinary expertise that combines legal knowledge with scientific understanding of animal behavior, veterinary medicine, and regulatory systems. Effective advocacy demanded fluency in multiple professional languages and the ability to translate between different conceptual frameworks to build compelling arguments that could persuade judges, regulators, and policymakers. Maria encouraged me to develop expertise in specific areas that aligned with my interests and capabilities. She recognized that my analytical skills and attention to detail were particularly valuable for regulatory compliance cases that required systematic documentation of violations and comprehensive understanding of complex administrative procedures. The field needs specialists who can navigate regulatory systems effectively, Maria explained during one of our case preparation sessions. Many attorneys understand courtroom litigation but struggle with administrative law and regulatory enforcement mechanisms. Your background gives you an advantage in understanding how these systems operate and how to use them strategically. Her guidance helped me recognize that my accounting experience had provided valuable preparation for administrative advocacy that required financial analysis, regulatory compliance assessment, and systematic documentation of institutional practices. These skills were directly transferable to animal welfare cases while serving purposes that felt personally meaningful and professionally rewarding. The puppy mill case culminated in a successful enforcement action that resulted in the seizure of all animals from the facility, substantial financial penalties against the operators, and permanent closure of the breeding operation. The outcome represented vindication for hundreds of animals who had suffered unnecessary deprivation, while demonstrating the effectiveness of strategic legal advocacy in addressing systemic problems. More importantly for my professional development, the case established my credibility within the animal welfare community as someone who could manage complex regulatory cases and produce meaningful results. Maria began assigning me increased responsibility for case management and client communication, recognizing that my combination of legal knowledge and practical experience made me valuable for increasingly sophisticated advocacy efforts. The success also attracted attention from other attorneys and advocacy organizations who were dealing with similar regulatory challenges. I began receiving consultation requests from lawyers who needed assistance with administrative compliance issues, financial analysis of commercial animal operations, and strategic planning for regulatory enforcement cases. These consultation opportunities provided additional income while expanding my professional network within the animal welfare legal community. The work confirmed that my specialized knowledge was valuable to practitioners who lacked similar backgrounds in business administration and regulatory analysis. During this period, my relationship with Marcus continued to deteriorate, as my professional commitments required increasing time and energy that was no longer available for accommodating his preferences and expectations. His resentment about my career transition had expanded beyond financial concerns to encompass broader disapproval of my changed priorities and growing independence. The tension reached a breaking point when I was required to travel to California for a week-long training program on federal animal welfare regulations. The program was essential for developing expertise that would enable me to work on cases involving interstate commerce and federal enforcement agencies. But Marcus viewed the travel as evidence that my work was becoming more important to me than our relationship. "You spend more time thinking about those animals than you do about us," he complained when I explained the importance of the training opportunity. "This whole animal rights thing has completely taken over your life. You are not the same person I married." His observation was accurate in ways he did not intend. The woman he had married had been willing to subordinate her interests to his preferences. and had lacked clear professional goals or personal mission that might compete with his expectations. The woman I was becoming had developed independent commitments that provided meaning and direction that could not be compromised for the sake of relationship harmony. "Maybe that is the point," I replied. "Maybe the person you married was not who I was supposed to become." The conversation marked a fundamental shift in how I understood our relationship and my responsibility for maintaining it. For the first time, I acknowledged that growth and change were not necessarily problems to be managed, but rather natural processes that might require different relationship structures or different partners who could support continued development rather than resist it. I attended the California training program despite Marcus's objections, spending a week learning advanced techniques for investigating federal violations and building cases that could withstand scrutiny from experienced defense attorneys representing well-funded commercial operations. The program was taught by attorneys and investigators who had achieved significant victories against major agricultural corporations, puppy mill operations, and research facilities that had violated federal animal welfare standards. The training provided both technical knowledge and inspiration from practitioners who had dedicated their careers to protecting animals through strategic legal advocacy. Their presentations demonstrated that individual attorneys and small organizations could achieve meaningful victories against well-resourced opponents through careful preparation, innovative legal strategies, and persistent commitment to animal protection. One presenter who particularly influenced my thinking was David Kim, a federal prosecutor who specialized in animal welfare violations. His office had successfully prosecuted dozens of cases involving commercial animal operations, achieving both individual convictions and systemic changes in industry practices through strategic enforcement actions. The key to effective animal welfare prosecution is building cases that demonstrate clear harm and establish clear responsibility, David explained during his presentation. Juries understand animal suffering when it is documented properly, and they hold defendants accountable when the evidence shows deliberate disregard for animal welfare requirements. His approach emphasized the importance of systematic evidence collection and professional presentation of animal welfare issues in ways that resonated with judges and juries who might not have prior experience with these types of cases. The methodology provided a framework for translating emotional concerns about animal suffering into legally compelling arguments that could produce concrete results. The week-long program also provided networking opportunities with attorneys, investigators, and advocates from throughout the Western United States who were working on similar cases and facing similar challenges. The professional relationships I developed became valuable resources for ongoing case collaboration and knowledge sharing that enhanced my effectiveness as an animal welfare advocate. When I returned to Phoenix, I brought new expertise and expanded professional connections that immediately enhanced my value to Maria's practice. I also brought renewed commitment to continued professional development and growing confidence in my ability to make meaningful contributions to animal protection through legal advocacy. Maria recognized the impact of the training program and began assigning me leadership responsibility for regulatory compliance cases that required the specialized knowledge I had developed. The increased responsibility came with expanded compensation that helped offset the income reduction from leaving full-time accounting work. More importantly, the professional recognition validated my decision to pursue animal welfare law, despite the personal and financial challenges involved in career transition. The work was intellectually demanding and emotionally rewarding in ways that confirmed the alignment between my professional activities and personal values. However, the expanding professional commitments created additional tension with Marcus, who became increasingly resentful of the time and energy I devoted to work that he continued to view as misplaced priority. His complaints about my schedule and travel requirements became more frequent and pointed, suggesting that my professional success was threatening rather than celebratory from his perspective. The fundamental incompatibility between my growing professional identity and Marcus's expectations for our relationship became impossible to ignore or rationalize. He had married someone who would prioritize their partnership above individual professional development, while I had evolved into someone whose work provided meaning and purpose that could not be compromised without sacrificing essential aspects of my identity. The realization that our relationship might not survive my continued professional development was initially devastating, but it gradually became liberating, as I recognized that authentic success required alignment between personal values and life choices. Maintaining a relationship that required me to diminish my professional commitments would ultimately undermine both my individual fulfillment and my capacity to contribute meaningfully to animal protection. During this period of relationship tension, I began developing plans for establishing an independent animal welfare legal practice that would allow greater flexibility and autonomy in case selection and advocacy strategy. Maria had been supportive of my professional development, but her practice focused primarily on local and regional cases that did not fully utilize the federal expertise I had developed through the California training program. The concept of independent practice was initially intimidating because it would require business development skills and financial management capabilities that extended beyond my legal and advocacy expertise. However, my accounting background provided relevant preparation for the administrative aspects of law practice, while my growing reputation within the animal welfare community created potential client base for specialized services. I began researching the requirements for establishing a legal services organization focused on animal welfare advocacy, including licensing requirements, insurance needs, office space considerations, and marketing strategies for reaching potential clients. The research revealed that several successful practices had been established by attorneys who specialized in animal welfare law and who served both individual clients and advocacy organizations throughout their regions. The financial projections for independent practice were encouraging, particularly for someone with specialized expertise in regulatory compliance and federal animal welfare law. The combination of technical knowledge and practical experience created value that was rare in the legal market, and that commanded premium compensation from clients who needed sophisticated advocacy services. More importantly, independent practice would provide complete autonomy in case selection and advocacy strategy, allowing me to focus exclusively on cases that aligned with my values and that offered significant potential for protecting animals. The prospect of building a practice dedicated entirely to animal welfare created excitement that reminded me why I had originally been drawn to this field. I began drafting a business plan for establishing the Elena Vasquez Animal Rights Legal Foundation, a nonprofit organization that would provide legal services to animal welfare organizations while pursuing strategic litigation to strengthen protective standards and enforcement mechanisms. The organization would combine direct client services with policy advocacy to address both immediate animal welfare problems and systemic issues that affected thousands of animals. The business plan incorporated lessons learned from my work with Maria's practice, the specialized knowledge gained through federal training programs, and the professional relationships developed through networking with other animal welfare attorneys. The foundation would fill gaps in legal services that were not adequately addressed by existing organizations, while providing a vehicle for my continued professional development and contribution to animal protection. Developing the business plan required extensive research into funding mechanisms for nonprofit legal organizations, including grant opportunities from foundations that supported animal welfare causes, fee-for-service arrangements with advocacy organizations, and individual donor development strategies that could provide sustainable financial support. The research revealed that several major foundations provided significant funding for animal welfare legal advocacy, particularly for organizations that could demonstrate expertise in regulatory enforcement and policy development. The funding landscape was competitive, but organizations with strong track records and clear strategic focus could secure substantial support for their operations. My experience with complex regulatory cases and federal animal welfare law provided competitive advantages for grant applications, particularly when combined with demonstrated results from previous advocacy efforts. The puppy mill case and other successful regulatory enforcement actions provided concrete evidence of impact that funders expected to see from potential grantees. I spent several months developing comprehensive grant applications to 3 major animal welfare foundations, requesting startup funding that would enable me to establish the Elena Vasquez Animal Rights Legal Foundation and begin providing services to animal welfare organizations throughout the southwestern United States. The grant applications required detailed descriptions of my professional background, strategic plans for the organization, expected outcomes from funded activities, and financial projections that demonstrated sustainable operations beyond the initial funding period. The preparation process was intensive and time-consuming, but it forced me to articulate clear vision and measurable goals for my professional future. While waiting for responses to grant applications, I continued working with Maria's practice while developing additional expertise through continuing education programs and professional development opportunities. I also began building relationships with animal welfare organizations that would potentially become clients for the foundation, understanding their legal needs and demonstrating how specialized legal services could enhance their advocacy effectiveness. The combination of grant application development, continued casework, and client development activities created a demanding schedule that required careful time management and strategic prioritization. However, the work was energizing rather than exhausting, because it represented progress toward professional goals that aligned perfectly with my values and interests. 6 months after submitting grant applications, I received notification that 2 of the 3 foundations had approved funding requests totaling $120,000 for the first year of operations. The grants would cover office space, basic equipment, professional insurance, and partial salary support, while I established the foundation and began providing services to animal welfare organizations. The funding approval represented validation of my professional expertise and strategic vision for animal welfare legal advocacy. More importantly, it provided financial foundation for establishing independent practice that would allow complete focus on animal protection work without requiring compromise or accommodation of conflicting priorities. The grants also established credibility within the animal welfare community that attracted attention from organizations seeking sophisticated legal representation for complex regulatory cases. Before the foundation was officially operational, I had received inquiry calls from 6 different animal welfare organizations requesting assistance with federal compliance issues, commercial breeding facility investigations, and policy development projects. The early client interest confirmed that demand existed for specialized animal welfare legal services, and that my combination of technical expertise and practical experience was valued by organizations that needed effective advocacy support. The foundation would begin operations with established client base and clear demand for its services. The establishment of the Elena Vasquez Animal Rights Legal Foundation required comprehensive planning that extended far beyond securing initial funding. Creating a functioning nonprofit legal organization involved navigating complex regulatory requirements, establishing operational systems, and developing strategic partnerships that would enable effective service delivery to animal welfare organizations throughout the region. The process demanded skills in business administration, legal compliance, and organizational development that challenged my capabilities while providing opportunities for continued professional growth. The first phase of foundation establishment involved securing appropriate office space that would accommodate both client meetings and research activities, while projecting professional credibility essential for effective legal practice. After evaluating multiple options throughout Phoenix, I selected a suite in a modern office building that housed several other nonprofit organizations, creating an environment that reflected shared commitment to social causes, while providing practical advantages, such as shared conference facilities and collaborative networking opportunities. The office space required substantial setup investment to create functional work environment equipped with legal research databases, case management software, document storage systems, and communication technology necessary for serving clients effectively. The initial equipment costs were significant, but the grant funding provided adequate resources to establish professional operations that could support the foundation's mission, while demonstrating fiscal responsibility to funders and potential donors. Recruiting qualified staff represented another critical challenge for the foundation's early operations. The specialized nature of animal welfare law required personnel who possessed both legal expertise and genuine commitment to animal protection, a combination that was relatively rare in the Phoenix legal market. Additionally, the foundation's startup budget limited staffing to essential positions that would provide maximum operational effectiveness while maintaining financial sustainability. I hired Jennifer Walsh, a recent law school graduate who had concentrated her studies on environmental law with specific focus on animal welfare issues. Jennifer possessed strong research and writing skills, demonstrated passion for animal protection, and expressed genuine interest in developing expertise in regulatory compliance and enforcement advocacy. Her enthusiasm and capabilities made her an ideal foundation employee who could grow with the organization while contributing immediately to case management and client services. The foundation also contracted with Dr. Sarah Chen, the retired veterinarian who had originally inspired my interest in animal welfare law, to provide scientific consultation on cases requiring veterinary expertise. Her involvement provided credibility and technical knowledge that enhanced the Foundation's ability to handle complex cases while establishing valuable connections with the veterinary community throughout Arizona. The operational structure I developed for the Foundation reflected lessons learned from my experience with Maria Rodriguez's practice, while incorporating innovative approaches designed to maximize impact and efficiency. The organization focused on 3 primary service areas that addressed different aspects of animal welfare legal advocacy, while creating diverse revenue streams that supported financial sustainability. The first service area involved direct legal representation for animal welfare organizations facing regulatory compliance issues, enforcement actions, or litigation challenging their advocacy activities. These cases typically generated fee-for-service revenue while providing opportunities to establish precedents that benefited the broader animal welfare community. The work required sophisticated legal analysis and strategic thinking while producing measurable outcomes that demonstrated the Foundation's effectiveness. The second service area encompassed policy development and regulatory advocacy, designed to strengthen legal protections for animals and improve enforcement of existing standards. This work often involved collaboration with legislative staff, regulatory agencies, and other advocacy organizations to develop comprehensive approaches to systemic problems affecting animal welfare. While policy work generated limited direct revenue, it created opportunities for grant funding and established the Foundation's reputation as a thought leader within the animal welfare community. The third service area focused on education and training programs that built advocacy capacity within animal welfare organizations while generating supplemental income through workshop fees and consulting arrangements. These programs provided practical knowledge about legal advocacy techniques, regulatory compliance requirements, and strategic planning approaches that enhanced the effectiveness of local and regional animal welfare organizations. The combination of direct legal services, policy advocacy, and educational programming created a comprehensive approach to animal welfare legal advocacy that addressed immediate needs while building long-term capacity for systemic change. The diversified service model also provided financial stability that enabled the Foundation to pursue high-impact cases that might not generate adequate revenue to support operations independently. During the Foundation's first 6 months of operation, I successfully managed 17 different cases involving commercial breeding facilities, laboratory animal welfare violations, companion animal custody disputes, and regulatory enforcement actions. The case outcomes included substantial financial settlements, improved animal care standards, and policy changes that benefited thousands of animals throughout Arizona and neighboring states. The most significant early case involved challenging the licensing renewal of a research facility that had accumulated multiple violations of federal animal welfare standards while conducting experiments on primates and other mammals. The facility's violations included inadequate veterinary care, substandard housing conditions, and procedural failures that had resulted in preventable animal suffering over several years. My investigation of the research facility case required extensive review of federal inspection reports, veterinary records, and facility documentation to establish patterns of non-compliance that demonstrated systematic disregard for animal welfare requirements. The research process was time-intensive and required coordination with federal regulators, whistleblower sources within the facility, and scientific experts who could evaluate the adequacy of animal care protocols. The legal strategy I developed combined administrative advocacy with public pressure campaigns designed to encourage voluntary compliance, while maintaining options for litigation if regulatory enforcement proved inadequate. The approach required careful coordination with animal welfare organizations, media representatives, and political leaders who could amplify public attention on the facility's violations. The case culminated in a settlement agreement that required the research facility to implement comprehensive animal care improvements, submit to enhanced monitoring by federal regulators, and provide financial support for alternative research methods that could reduce animal experimentation. The settlement established important precedents for holding research facilities accountable for animal welfare violations, while demonstrating the effectiveness of strategic legal advocacy in achieving systemic improvements. The research facility case also generated significant media attention that raised public awareness about animal welfare issues in scientific research, while establishing the Foundation's reputation as an effective advocate for laboratory animal protection. The publicity attracted new clients and donors while creating opportunities for policy advocacy at state and federal levels. The Foundation's early successes created demand for services that exceeded our initial capacity, requiring strategic decisions about case selection and resource allocation to maximize impact while maintaining quality standards. I developed priority criteria that emphasized cases with potential for establishing favorable precedents, achieving systemic improvements, and generating educational value for the animal welfare community. The selection process also considered the Foundation's capacity to handle complex litigation while maintaining financial sustainability and staff well-being. Some potential cases required resources that exceeded our capabilities, while others offered limited opportunities for meaningful impact despite significant animal welfare concerns. During this period of rapid organizational growth, my relationship with Marcus reached its inevitable conclusion. His resentment about my professional commitments had evolved into fundamental incompatibility that could not be resolved through compromise or accommodation. My success with the Foundation had demonstrated that my career transition was not temporary enthusiasm, but permanent commitment to work that provided meaning and purpose he could not understand or support. The conversation that ended our marriage occurred on a Sunday evening when I was preparing for a week-long trip to Washington, D.C. to participate in congressional hearings on federal animal welfare enforcement. Marcus had spent the weekend making increasingly critical comments about my travel schedule and professional priorities, culminating in an ultimatum that forced final clarification of our incompatible expectations. "You have to choose," he said with finality that indicated he had been planning this confrontation. "Either this animal rights obsession stops being more important than our marriage, or we need to end this relationship. I will not continue being married to someone who cares more about animals than her own husband." His characterization of my professional work as obsession that competed with our relationship revealed fundamental misunderstanding of both my career motivations and the nature of meaningful partnership. More troubling was his expectation that I should abandon work that provided purpose and fulfillment to accommodate his comfort with my previous dependence and accommodation. "I choose the work," I replied without hesitation, recognizing that authentic success required alignment between personal values and life choices. "The woman you married was not who I was meant to become, and I will not go backward to maintain a relationship that requires me to be smaller than I am capable of being." The divorce process was relatively straightforward because we had accumulated limited shared assets and had no children requiring custody arrangements. Marcus retained the duplex apartment and associated furnishings, while I kept Luna and the professional equipment necessary for continuing my legal practice. The financial settlement was modest but adequate to support my transition to complete independence. The end of my marriage created emotional challenges that required significant adjustment, but it also provided liberation from constant pressure to justify professional choices and minimize personal achievements to accommodate Marcus's discomfort with my success. The relationship had become obstacle to continued growth, rather than source of support for pursuing meaningful work. More immediately, the divorce eliminated financial constraints that had limited my ability to invest in Foundation expansion and professional development opportunities. Without Marcus's resistance to animal-related expenditures, I could allocate resources strategically to enhance the Foundation's capabilities and impact. The congressional hearings in Washington provided valuable opportunities to present testimony about regulatory enforcement challenges, while building relationships with federal policymakers who influenced animal welfare legislation. My presentation focused on specific cases that demonstrated gaps in current enforcement mechanisms, while proposing practical solutions that could strengthen protection for laboratory animals, commercial breeding operations, and other regulated facilities. The testimony was well received by committee members who expressed appreciation for practical insights based on direct experience with regulatory enforcement cases. Several congressional staff members requested follow-up meetings to discuss potential legislative improvements that could address systemic problems in federal animal welfare oversight. The Washington trip also provided networking opportunities with national animal welfare organizations that were seeking legal expertise for federal advocacy campaigns. The relationships I developed created potential for collaborative cases that could achieve broader impact than regional litigation, while providing additional revenue sources for the Foundation's operations. Upon returning to Phoenix, I found that media coverage of my congressional testimony had generated significant interest in the Foundation's work, resulting in inquiry calls from potential clients throughout the southwestern United States. The national exposure had established credibility that opened doors to more complex and high-profile cases, while attracting Foundation grant opportunities that could support expanded operations. The increased demand for services required strategic planning for organizational growth that would maintain quality standards while expanding impact and reach. I developed a 3-year expansion plan that included hiring additional attorneys, establishing satellite offices in other states, and creating specialized programs that addressed emerging animal welfare issues such as wildlife trafficking and exotic animal ownership. The expansion plan also incorporated technology improvements that would enhance service delivery efficiency while reducing operational costs. Case management software, document automation systems, and remote collaboration tools would enable the Foundation to serve clients more effectively while supporting staff productivity and professional development. The most significant element of the expansion plan involved establishing the Elena Vasquez Animal Rights Legal Institute, an educational program designed to train attorneys and advocates in specialized animal welfare law techniques. The institute would provide continuing legal education credits while generating revenue through program fees and creating a network of practitioners who shared expertise and collaborative case opportunities. The institute concept reflected my recognition that effective animal welfare advocacy required a broader community of skilled practitioners who could address the volume of cases and policy issues that exceeded any single organization's capacity. By training other attorneys in specialized techniques, the Foundation could multiply its impact while establishing sustainable revenue streams that supported long-term operations. The planning process for organizational expansion required sophisticated business analysis that drew on skills developed during my accounting career while incorporating knowledge gained through legal practice and nonprofit management. The combination of technical expertise and practical experience positioned the Foundation for strategic growth that could achieve meaningful impact while maintaining financial sustainability. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, the Elena Vasquez Animal Rights Legal Foundation had achieved recognition as the premier animal welfare legal advocacy organization in the southwestern United States. Our case wins had established important legal precedents, our policy work had influenced state and federal regulatory improvements, and our educational programs had enhanced advocacy capacity throughout the region. The Foundation's success was gratifying both professionally and personally, because it demonstrated that career transitions based on authentic values and strategic skill development could achieve meaningful impact while providing financial security and professional fulfillment. The woman who had been abandoned at the veterinary emergency clinic had built an organization that provided effective advocacy for thousands of animals who lacked other sources of legal protection. Luna had recovered completely from her surgical experience and had become the unofficial Foundation mascot, frequently accompanying me to the office and providing therapeutic presence for staff members dealing with emotionally challenging animal welfare cases. Her presence served as constant reminder of the individual animals whose lives were improved through the Foundation's advocacy work. The transformation from desperate pet owner to established legal advocate had required 3 years of intensive effort, but the Foundation provided a platform for continued growth and expanded impact that would benefit countless animals in the years ahead. The most challenging phase of professional development was complete, but the most meaningful phase of contribution was just beginning. The Foundation's second year of operations marked a pivotal transition from regional advocacy organization to nationally recognized center of excellence in animal welfare law. The expansion required sophisticated strategic planning that balanced ambitious growth objectives with operational sustainability, while maintaining the quality standards that had established our reputation within the legal and animal welfare communities. The transformation demanded leadership capabilities that extended far beyond my previous experience, while creating opportunities for impact that had seemed impossible during the Foundation's startup phase. The catalyst for national expansion emerged from an unexpected source. The United States Department of Agriculture contacted the Foundation requesting assistance with a complex multi-state investigation involving commercial breeding operations that were allegedly violating federal animal welfare standards across 7 different states. The investigation required legal expertise and federal regulatory enforcement, combined with practical knowledge of commercial breeding practices, creating demand for specialized capabilities that few organizations possessed. The USDA case represented the Foundation's first opportunity to work directly with federal enforcement agencies on matters of national significance. The complexity of the investigation exceeded any previous case we had handled, involving coordination with multiple federal offices, state regulatory agencies, and local law enforcement organizations across the western United States. The successful management of this case would establish precedent for federal nonprofit collaboration, while demonstrating our capacity to handle investigations of unprecedented scope and complexity. I assembled a specialized team to manage the USDA investigation, including Jennifer Walsh, who had developed considerable expertise in regulatory compliance during her 18 months with the Foundation, Dr. Sarah Chen for veterinary consultation, and 2 additional attorneys with specific experience in interstate commerce and federal enforcement procedures. The team represented the Foundation's most sophisticated case management approach, requiring coordination and communication protocols that ensured effective collaboration while maintaining confidentiality standards required for federal investigations. The investigation process required extensive travel to breeding facilities throughout Nevada, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, California, and Arizona. Each facility inspection involved detailed documentation of animal housing conditions, veterinary care protocols, record-keeping practices, and compliance with federal standards governing commercial breeding operations. The inspection reports required precise technical language that would support potential enforcement actions while maintaining scientific accuracy about animal welfare conditions. The evidence collection phase revealed systematic violations that extended across multiple facilities operated by the same corporate entity. The violations included inadequate veterinary care, substandard housing conditions, insufficient food and water provision, and failure to maintain required records documenting animal health and welfare monitoring. The pattern of violations suggested deliberate disregard for federal requirements rather than inadvertent compliance failures. The legal strategy I developed for the USDA case combined administrative enforcement recommendations with civil penalty calculations that reflected the severity and duration of the violations. The approach required comprehensive analysis of federal regulations, precedent enforcement actions, and economic factors that influenced appropriate penalty levels. The strategy also incorporated compliance improvement requirements that would prevent future violations while ensuring adequate animal care standards. The case preparation process required 6 months of intensive work that stretched the Foundation's operational capacity while providing valuable experience in federal enforcement procedures. The complexity of coordinating multiple agencies and managing vast documentation requirements demanded project management skills that exceeded traditional legal practice capabilities. However, the successful completion of this work established our credibility with federal agencies while demonstrating capacity for complex multi-jurisdictional cases. The USDA investigation culminated in comprehensive enforcement action that resulted in substantial financial penalties, mandatory compliance improvements, and ongoing federal monitoring of the corporate entity's breeding operations. The outcome established important precedent for federal animal welfare enforcement, while generating significant media attention that highlighted both the violations and the collaborative approach used to address them. The federal case success created immediate demand for similar services from other government agencies and animal welfare organizations throughout the United States. The Foundation received inquiry calls from attorneys general offices in multiple states, federal prosecutors handling animal welfare violations, and national advocacy organizations seeking sophisticated legal representation for complex regulatory cases. The increased demand required strategic decisions about organizational capacity and geographic expansion that would enable effective service delivery while maintaining quality standards. I developed a comprehensive expansion plan that included establishing satellite offices in strategic locations, recruiting additional specialized attorneys, and creating operational systems that could support multi-state case management efficiently. The expansion plan identified Denver, Colorado, and Austin, Texas as optimal locations for satellite offices that would provide geographic coverage for federal cases, while serving significant regional markets for animal welfare legal services. Both cities possessed strong animal welfare communities, established legal markets that could support specialized practice, and proximity to federal agencies that generated potential collaboration opportunities. The Denver office establishment began with recruitment of Thomas Martinez, an experienced attorney who possessed expertise in federal regulatory law combined with demonstrated commitment to animal welfare advocacy. Thomas had spent 8 years working with environmental law firms before transitioning to animal welfare issues, bringing sophisticated understanding of administrative procedures and enforcement mechanisms that complemented the Foundation's existing capabilities. The Austin office recruitment focused on identifying attorneys with specific expertise in agricultural law and livestock welfare issues that were particularly relevant to cases involving large-scale commercial animal operations. The position required knowledge of both federal and state regulations governing agricultural practices, combined with practical understanding of industry standards and economic factors that influenced operational decisions by commercial producers. The satellite office establishment required substantial investment in technology infrastructure that would enable seamless coordination between locations while maintaining security standards appropriate for sensitive legal work. The Foundation implemented cloud-based case management systems, secure communication networks, and document sharing protocols that supported collaborative work regardless of geographic location. The technology implementation also included advanced research databases and analytical tools that enhanced the Foundation's capacity for complex regulatory analysis and precedent research. These capabilities provided competitive advantages for federal cases while improving efficiency for routine legal research and document preparation activities. During the organizational expansion process, I began developing the Elena Vasquez Animal Rights Legal Institute, the educational component of the Foundation's mission that would provide specialized training for attorneys and advocates throughout the animal welfare community. The Institute represented strategic opportunity to multiply the Foundation's impact by building capacity within other organizations while generating sustainable revenue through educational programming. The Institute curriculum development required comprehensive analysis of existing educational offerings in animal welfare law to identify gaps that could be addressed through specialized training programs. The research revealed significant demand for practical training in regulatory enforcement procedures, federal case management, and strategic advocacy planning that was not adequately addressed by traditional law school curricula or continuing legal education providers. I designed 3 primary educational programs that would serve different constituencies within the animal welfare community while generating diverse revenue streams for the Institute. The first program provided intensive week-long training for attorneys who wanted to develop expertise in animal welfare law but lacked practical experience in this specialized field. The curriculum included regulatory analysis, case management techniques, client relations, and strategic planning approaches that had proven effective in complex advocacy cases. The second program offered shorter workshop format training for animal welfare organization staff members who needed practical knowledge about legal advocacy techniques but did not require comprehensive attorney-level education. These workshops covered topics such as documentation standards for potential legal cases, collaboration techniques with legal counsel, and strategic planning approaches that enhanced advocacy effectiveness. The third program provided advanced seminar series for experienced animal welfare attorneys who wanted to develop expertise in emerging areas such as federal enforcement procedures, international animal welfare law, and innovative litigation strategies. These seminars featured expert presenters from government agencies, academic institutions, and leading advocacy organizations who shared specialized knowledge and practical insights. The Institute's first program session attracted 43 attorneys from throughout the United States, exceeding enrollment projections and demonstrating significant demand for specialized animal welfare law training. The program evaluations were exceptional, with participants reporting immediate application of learned techniques to their ongoing cases and expressed interest in advanced training opportunities. The educational programming success created opportunities for collaboration with law schools that wanted to incorporate animal welfare law components into their curricula. Several institutions expressed interest in partnership arrangements that would provide student internship opportunities while enhancing the Foundation's capacity for case management and research activities. The law school partnerships also created pathways for recruiting talented graduates who possessed interest in animal welfare issues but needed practical experience and mentoring to develop expertise in this specialized field. The Foundation's reputation as leading educational provider attracted high-quality candidates who enhanced our organizational capabilities while building careers in meaningful advocacy work. During this period of rapid expansion, the Foundation achieved several landmark case victories that established important legal precedents while generating national media attention. The most significant victory involved challenging federal regulations that permitted inadequate housing standards for laboratory animals used in government-funded research. The case required sophisticated constitutional analysis combined with extensive scientific evidence about animal behavioral needs and welfare requirements. The laboratory animal case strategy incorporated cutting-edge research in animal cognition and behavior that demonstrated the scientific basis for housing standards that exceeded existing regulatory minimums. The legal arguments combined constitutional due process claims with administrative law challenges to regulatory adequacy, creating a comprehensive approach that addressed both individual violations and systemic regulatory deficiencies. The case proceedings attracted significant attention from the scientific research community, animal welfare advocates, and legal scholars who recognized the potential implications for federal animal welfare enforcement. The oral arguments were covered by major media outlets while generating extensive discussion within academic and professional publications focused on animal law and regulatory policy. The court decision established precedent requiring federal agencies to consider current scientific knowledge about animal welfare needs when developing regulatory standards, rather than relying on outdated information that failed to reflect advances in animal cognition research. The ruling created framework for challenging other regulatory standards that did not adequately protect animal welfare based on contemporary scientific understanding. The laboratory animal case victory generated substantial media coverage that highlighted both the specific legal issues and the Foundation's role in advancing animal welfare through strategic litigation. The publicity attracted new clients and donors while establishing recognition as leading organization in the emerging field of animal welfare constitutional law. The national recognition also created speaking opportunities at legal conferences, academic symposiums, and professional development programs throughout the United States. These presentations provided platforms for sharing expertise while building relationships with attorneys, academics, and advocates who could contribute to future collaborative cases and policy initiatives. The Foundation's expanding influence attracted attention from major animal welfare organizations that were seeking legal expertise for national campaigns addressing federal policy issues. These collaborations provided opportunities for cases with broader impact while generating revenue that supported continued organizational growth and capability development. The most significant national collaboration involved partnership with 3 other animal welfare organizations to challenge federal agricultural policies that exempted certain commercial practices from animal welfare oversight. The case required extensive economic analysis, scientific research, and regulatory assessment that demonstrated the Foundation's capacity for complex multidisciplinary advocacy work. The federal agricultural policy case represented the Foundation's most ambitious litigation effort, involving constitutional challenges to statutory exemptions combined with administrative law claims regarding regulatory inadequacy. The case strategy required coordination with agricultural economists, veterinary scientists, and constitutional law experts who provided specialized expertise that enhanced the legal arguments. The case management required sophisticated project coordination that involved multiple attorneys, numerous expert witnesses, extensive document discovery, and complex procedural requirements that challenged the Foundation's operational capabilities. However, the successful management of this case demonstrated our capacity for national-level litigation while establishing precedent for future federal policy challenges. The agricultural policy case proceedings generated extensive media attention and political discussion about the relationship between commercial agricultural practices and animal welfare standards. The case raised public awareness about agricultural exemptions while creating political pressure for legislative improvements to animal protection laws. While the case remained in litigation, the Foundation's involvement established recognition as leading organization capable of challenging federal policies that affected millions of animals in commercial agricultural settings. The reputation for sophisticated federal litigation attracted additional case referrals while generating Foundation grant opportunities from organizations interested in supporting constitutional animal welfare advocacy. By the conclusion of the Foundation's second operational year, the organization had achieved recognition as premier animal welfare legal advocacy organization in the United States. The case victories, educational programming, and federal collaborations had established credibility and expertise that positioned the Foundation for continued expansion and increased impact in protecting animals through strategic legal advocacy. The transformation from regional startup organization to national leader in animal welfare law demonstrated how strategic planning, quality service delivery, and commitment to meaningful impact could create sustainable organizational growth while achieving significant positive outcomes for animal protection. The Foundation had become precisely the type of organization I had envisioned during those early planning sessions, but the reality exceeded my initial expectations in scope, influence, and potential for continued development. Luna continued to serve as Foundation mascot, providing daily reminder of the individual animals whose lives were improved through our legal advocacy work. Her presence represented continuity between the personal crisis that had initiated my career transformation and the professional success that enabled meaningful contribution to animal welfare causes throughout the United States. The Foundation's third year of operations marked the transition from successful legal advocacy organization to influential policy development institution that actively shaped national conversations about animal welfare legislation and regulatory reform. This evolution reflected growing recognition within government agencies, academic institutions, and advocacy communities that the Foundation possessed unique expertise in translating complex animal welfare issues into effective legal and policy solutions. The transformation required sophisticated understanding of legislative processes, regulatory development procedures, and political dynamics that influenced federal and state animal protection initiatives. The opportunity for expanded policy influence emerged through invitation to serve on the Federal Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, a newly established body tasked with providing expert recommendations to the Department of Agriculture regarding improvements to federal animal welfare standards and enforcement mechanisms. The committee represented the first formal mechanism for incorporating external expertise into federal animal welfare policy development, creating unprecedented opportunity for direct influence on regulatory standards that affected millions of animals throughout the United States. The advisory committee appointment recognized the Foundation's established credibility in federal animal welfare enforcement while acknowledging my personal expertise in regulatory analysis and strategic advocacy. The position provided platform for promoting evidence-based policy improvements while building relationships with federal officials who possessed authority to implement meaningful reforms to animal protection systems. The committee's initial mandate focused on comprehensive review of current federal animal welfare regulations to identify areas where scientific advances in animal cognition and behavior research suggested opportunities for improved protection standards. The review process required systematic analysis of existing regulations, assessment of enforcement effectiveness, and development of specific recommendations for regulatory improvements that could enhance animal welfare without creating undue burden on regulated industries. I approached the committee work with strategic focus on areas where the Foundation's research and case experience had identified significant gaps between current regulatory standards and evidence-based animal welfare requirements. The Foundation's case files contained extensive documentation of situations where existing regulations permitted conditions that caused preventable animal suffering, providing concrete examples of regulatory inadequacy that could support specific policy recommendations. The committee's first major initiative addressed housing standards for laboratory animals used in federal research programs. Current regulations established minimum space requirements based on decades-old research that did not reflect contemporary understanding of animal behavioral needs and psychological well-being. The Foundation's previous litigation had established legal precedent requiring consideration of current scientific knowledge, creating foundation for comprehensive regulatory reform that could improve conditions for thousands of research animals. The regulatory review process involved collaboration with veterinary scientists, animal behaviorists, research facility administrators, and advocacy organizations to develop housing standards that balanced scientific animal welfare requirements with practical implementation considerations. The collaborative approach ensured that proposed regulations would be both scientifically sound and operationally feasible, increasing likelihood of successful adoption and compliance. The new laboratory animal housing standards incorporated research on species-specific behavioral needs, environmental enrichment requirements, and social housing arrangements that supported natural behaviors while facilitating necessary research activities. The standards represented significant improvement over existing regulations while establishing framework for future updates based on evolving scientific understanding of animal welfare needs. The regulatory development process also created valuable precedent for evidence-based policymaking that prioritized animal welfare considerations while maintaining appropriate balance with research objectives and economic constraints. The approach demonstrated that comprehensive animal welfare improvements were achievable through systematic application of current scientific knowledge to regulatory development processes. The laboratory animal housing standards adoption generated substantial interest from research institutions, advocacy organizations, and regulatory agencies throughout the United States and internationally. The successful integration of advanced animal welfare science into federal regulations provided model for similar improvements in other regulated industries and jurisdictions. The Federal Advisory Committee work also provided opportunities for developing legislative proposals that addressed structural limitations in current animal welfare law that could not be resolved through regulatory modifications alone. The Foundation's case experience had identified numerous situations where inadequate statutory authority prevented effective enforcement action against facilities that caused significant animal suffering while maintaining technical compliance with existing regulations. I began developing comprehensive federal animal welfare legislation that would strengthen enforcement authorities, expand protected animal categories, and establish enhanced penalty structures for serious violations. The legislative development process required extensive research into existing federal and state animal protection laws, analysis of enforcement challenges, and strategic consideration of political factors that influenced prospects for congressional passage and implementation. The proposed Federal Animal Protection Enhancement Act incorporated lessons learned from the Foundation's federal enforcement cases, while addressing specific gaps in statutory authority that had prevented effective action against facilities with chronic compliance problems. The legislation expanded federal jurisdiction over commercial animal operations, established enhanced criminal penalties for serious violations, and created whistleblower protection systems that encouraged reporting of animal welfare violations. The legislation also incorporated innovative enforcement mechanisms that combined traditional regulatory oversight with community-based monitoring systems that enhanced detection of animal welfare problems while reducing enforcement costs for federal agencies. The approach recognized that effective animal protection required cooperation between government agencies and advocacy organizations, rather than reliance solely on federal inspection resources. The legislative development process involved extensive consultation with congressional staff members, federal agency officials, and animal welfare organizations to ensure that proposed provisions addressed genuine enforcement needs while maintaining political viability. The collaborative approach enhanced prospects for legislative success while building broad coalition support for animal welfare improvements. The Federal Animal Protection Enhancement Act attracted bipartisan support from congressional members who recognized the need for stronger federal animal welfare enforcement while appreciating the legislation's balanced approach to regulatory improvement. The bill received endorsements from major animal welfare organizations, veterinary professional associations, and law enforcement organizations that supported enhanced penalties for animal cruelty violations. The legislative advocacy process required sophisticated understanding of congressional procedures, political dynamics, and coalition-building techniques that extended the Foundation's capabilities into new areas of policy influence. The experience provided valuable knowledge about legislative development that enhanced the Foundation's effectiveness in future policy initiatives, while establishing relationships with key congressional staff members who worked on animal welfare issues. During the federal legislative development process, I simultaneously pursued state-level policy initiatives that could serve as models for broader adoption while addressing specific regional animal welfare challenges that were not adequately covered by federal regulations. The state initiatives focused on areas where federal law provided minimal protection, creating opportunities for innovative policy approaches that could demonstrate effectiveness and build support for national adoption. The most significant state initiative involved developing comprehensive commercial breeding facility regulations for Arizona that exceeded federal standards while addressing specific problems identified through the Foundation's enforcement cases. The proposed state regulations incorporated advanced animal welfare science, enhanced inspection procedures, and improved enforcement mechanisms that could prevent the types of violations that had required costly legal intervention. The state regulatory development process involved extensive collaboration with Arizona Department of Agriculture officials, state legislators, commercial breeding industry representatives, and animal welfare advocates to develop standards that balanced comprehensive animal protection with industry compliance capabilities. The collaborative approach ensured that proposed regulations would be both effective and implementable, while building broad stakeholder support for adoption. The Arizona Commercial Breeding Regulations established innovative compliance assistance programs that provided technical support for facility operators while maintaining strict enforcement standards for serious violations. The approach recognized that many compliance problems resulted from inadequate knowledge rather than deliberate disregard for animal welfare requirements, suggesting that educational interventions could prevent violations more effectively than purely punitive enforcement approaches. The state regulations also incorporated community oversight mechanisms that enhanced transparency in commercial breeding operations, while providing early warning systems for potential animal welfare problems. The provisions required public reporting of inspection results, established citizen complaint procedures, and created advisory committees that included animal welfare representatives alongside industry and regulatory officials. The Arizona Commercial Breeding Regulations adoption created national attention as model state legislation that demonstrated feasibility of enhanced animal welfare standards while maintaining viable commercial operations. The regulations provided framework that other states could adapt to their specific circumstances, while establishing precedent for comprehensive approach to commercial breeding oversight. The state legislative success also demonstrated the Foundation's capacity for effective policy development that balanced diverse stakeholder interests while achieving meaningful animal welfare improvements. The experience enhanced our credibility with both government officials and industry representatives who recognized our commitment to evidence-based policy development rather than ideological advocacy approaches. The combination of federal advisory committee work and state legislative initiatives established the Foundation as leading policy development organization within the national animal welfare community. The expertise in translating complex animal welfare issues into effective legal and regulatory solutions created demand for consultation services from government agencies, advocacy organizations, and academic institutions throughout the United States. The policy development work also created opportunities for international collaboration with animal welfare organizations and government agencies in other countries that were developing their own animal protection systems. The Foundation's expertise in evidence-based policy development and stakeholder engagement proved valuable for organizations seeking to improve animal welfare standards while maintaining political and economic viability. The international collaboration began with invitation to serve as consultant for European Union animal welfare policy development initiatives that were updating regulations governing laboratory animal welfare and commercial breeding standards. The consultation work provided opportunities for sharing successful policy approaches while learning from innovative regulatory developments in other jurisdictions. The European Union collaboration led to additional international consulting opportunities with government agencies in Canada, Australia, and several Latin American countries that were developing or updating their animal welfare legislation. The international work expanded the Foundation's influence while providing revenue sources that supported continued organizational growth and capability development. The policy development expertise also created opportunities for academic collaboration with law schools and veterinary institutions that were establishing animal welfare law programs and research initiatives. The Foundation provided practical knowledge about policy development processes while contributing to academic research that enhanced understanding of effective animal protection approaches. The academic collaborations included development of case studies based on the Foundation's successful policy initiatives that were incorporated into law school curricula and continuing legal education programs. The case studies provided practical examples of effective policy advocacy while building academic support for expanded animal welfare law education. The foundation also established fellowship programs that provided practical training opportunities for law students and recent graduates who possessed interest in animal welfare policy development. The fellowship programs created pipeline for training future animal welfare advocates while providing assistance with the foundation's expanding policy research and development activities. During this period of policy development focus, the foundation continued managing direct legal representation cases while building expertise in legislative and regulatory advocacy. The combination of practical case experience and policy development knowledge created unique capabilities that enhanced effectiveness in both areas while demonstrating comprehensive approach to animal welfare improvement. The most significant policy achievement during this period involved successful advocacy for inclusion of enhanced animal welfare provisions in the Federal Farm Bill reauthorization. The provisions established funding for animal welfare research, created grant programs for humane farming practices, and strengthened enforcement authorities for federal animal welfare violations. The Farm Bill advocacy required extensive coalition building with agricultural organizations, environmental groups, and rural legislators who possessed influence over agricultural policy development. The successful coalition demonstrated that animal welfare improvements could be achieved through collaborative approaches that addressed shared concerns about sustainable agricultural practices and rural economic development. The Farm Bill animal welfare provisions established precedent for incorporating animal welfare considerations into broader agricultural policy while creating funding mechanisms that supported continued research and program development. The achievement demonstrated the Foundation's capacity for complex legislative advocacy that achieved meaningful outcomes through strategic political engagement. By the conclusion of the Foundation's third operational year, the organization had achieved recognition as leading policy development institution within the national animal welfare community. The successful Federal Advisory Committee work, state legislative initiatives, and international collaboration had established expertise in evidence-based policy development that influenced animal protection systems throughout the United States and beyond. The policy development capabilities complemented the Foundation's established strengths in legal advocacy and educational programming, creating comprehensive approach to animal welfare improvement that addressed immediate problems through direct legal representation while building long-term capacity for systemic change through policy reform. The transformation from crisis-motivated individual advocate to policy development leader demonstrated how personal commitment to meaningful values could create institutional influence that benefited countless animals through improved legal and regulatory protections. The Foundation had become precisely the type of organization that could address both immediate animal welfare problems and systemic issues that required policy-level solutions. The Foundation's fourth year marked a strategic evolution toward developing innovative legal theories and judicial precedents that would fundamentally reshape animal welfare jurisprudence throughout the United States. This transition reflected growing sophistication in our legal approach, combined with recognition that lasting animal protection required judicial decisions that established new frameworks for understanding animal interests within existing legal systems. The challenge involved advancing legal concepts that traditional jurisprudence had not previously recognized, while maintaining sufficient connection to established legal principles that courts would find the arguments persuasive and implementable. The catalyst for this judicial innovation emerged from a complex case involving the estate planning implications of companion animal ownership. A wealthy philanthropist in California had established a substantial trust fund for the care of her 15 rescued dogs, with detailed provisions for their veterinary care, housing standards, and quality of life requirements. Following the benefactor's death, family members challenged the trust provisions, arguing that animals could not be legal beneficiaries and that the trust funds should revert to human heirs rather than supporting animal care. The case presented unprecedented opportunity to advance legal recognition of animal interests within established trust and estate law frameworks. Traditional legal doctrine treated animals as property without independent interests that could be protected through legal instruments, but evolving understanding of animal cognition and emotional capacity suggested that this framework might be constitutionally inadequate for contemporary society's relationship with companion animals. I developed a comprehensive legal strategy that combined constitutional due process arguments with innovative trust law theories, that recognized animals as beneficial interest holders rather than mere property. The approach required extensive research into evolving legal concepts in other jurisdictions, particularly European legal systems that had begun recognizing limited animal rights within their civil law frameworks. The constitutional argument centered on the principle that laws must reflect contemporary understanding of scientific facts, rather than outdated assumptions about animal cognition and emotional capacity. Decades of research in animal behavior and neurophysiology had established that many animals possessed cognitive and emotional capabilities that warranted legal consideration, suggesting that purely property-based legal frameworks might violate due process requirements by failing to recognize legitimate interests. The trust law argument incorporated recent developments in beneficial interest theory that recognized non-human entities as legitimate trust beneficiaries when specific criteria were met regarding capacity to benefit from trust provisions. Animals clearly possessed capacity to benefit from veterinary care, appropriate housing, and quality nutrition in ways that were measurable and legally cognizable, suggesting that traditional restrictions on animal beneficiaries reflected historical limitations rather than conceptual necessities. The case preparation required unprecedented collaboration between legal scholars, animal behaviorists, veterinary specialists, and constitutional law experts who could provide scientific foundation for the legal arguments. The interdisciplinary approach reflected the Foundation's commitment to evidence-based advocacy while demonstrating the complexity of contemporary animal welfare legal issues. The scientific evidence component involved detailed testimony from leading animal cognition researchers who could establish the factual foundation for recognizing animal interests within legal frameworks. The testimony demonstrated that the dogs covered by the trust provisions possessed cognitive and emotional capabilities that enabled them to experience benefit from the trust arrangements in ways that were scientifically verifiable and legally relevant. The veterinary testimony established the specific care requirements necessary for the dogs' welfare, while documenting how the trust provisions addressed these requirements through systematic and comprehensive care arrangements. The evidence demonstrated that the trust created measurable improvements in animal welfare that justified legal recognition of the beneficial interests involved. The constitutional law analysis required extensive research into due process jurisprudence and its application to evolving scientific understanding of various entities' legal interests. The research revealed that constitutional principles required legal systems to adapt to contemporary knowledge rather than maintaining frameworks based on outdated factual assumptions, providing foundation for arguments that purely property-based animal law violated constitutional requirements. The case proceedings generated substantial media attention and academic interest from legal scholars, who recognized the potential implications for animal welfare jurisprudence throughout the United States. The oral arguments attracted observers from law schools, animal welfare organizations, and constitutional law institutes who understood that the decision could establish significant precedent for future animal protection cases. The court decision represented a landmark victory for animal welfare law that established limited recognition of animal beneficial interests within trust law frameworks, while maintaining connection to established legal principles that ensured broad applicability. The ruling created precedent that enabled similar trust arrangements throughout the jurisdiction, while providing foundation for expanded recognition of animal interests in other legal contexts. The trust law victory generated immediate interest from estate planning attorneys throughout the United States, who recognized opportunities for incorporating animal welfare provisions into their practice, while serving clients who possess strong commitments to animal protection. The Foundation received numerous consultation requests from attorneys seeking guidance on drafting animal beneficial trust provisions that would withstand legal challenges while achieving meaningful animal welfare improvements. The precedent also created opportunities for expanded animal welfare advocacy through strategic litigation that built on the trust law decision to advance animal interests in other legal contexts. The recognition of animals as beneficial interest holders suggested possibilities for similar arguments in contexts involving custody disputes, insurance claims, and tort liability cases where animal interests might warrant legal consideration. Building on the trust law success, I identified strategic opportunities for advancing animal welfare jurisprudence through carefully selected test cases that could establish favorable precedents without overreaching beyond courts, willingness to recognize evolving legal concepts. The approach required sophisticated case selection that balanced ambitious legal goals with realistic assessment of judicial receptiveness to innovative animal welfare arguments. The next major judicial innovation involved developing standing doctrine that enabled animal welfare organizations to pursue legal action on behalf of specific animals rather than merely challenging general regulatory violations. Traditional standing requirements limited animal welfare litigation to cases where human plaintiffs could demonstrate direct harm, creating significant barriers to addressing animal welfare violations that did not directly impact human interests. The standing case emerged from a situation involving a roadside zoo that maintained inadequate conditions for several endangered species while complying with minimal regulatory requirements that prevented traditional enforcement action. The animals were suffering preventable harm that violated scientific standards for appropriate care, but no human parties possessed sufficient direct interest to establish traditional standing for legal challenge. I developed innovative standing arguments that recognized animal welfare organizations' representational capacity based on their institutional mission and expertise, rather than traditional harm-based standing requirements. The arguments incorporated recent developments in organizational standing doctrine, while establishing specific criteria that prevented frivolous litigation, while enabling legitimate animal welfare advocacy. The organizational standing theory required extensive research into environmental law precedents that had established similar representational standing concepts for natural resource protection. The environmental law analogy provided established legal framework that courts had previously recognized, while demonstrating conceptual consistency with animal welfare advocacy objectives. The case strategy also incorporated guardian ad litem concepts that recognized courts' authority to appoint representatives for entities that possessed interests but lacked capacity for self-representation. The guardian ad litem framework provided established legal mechanism for protecting interests of vulnerable parties while avoiding radical departures from traditional legal concepts. The standing case proceedings required sophisticated legal argumentation that balanced innovative concepts with established legal principles while addressing court concerns about potential expansion of litigation beyond manageable limits. The arguments emphasized specific criteria for organizational standing that would prevent abuse while enabling legitimate animal welfare advocacy through judicial processes. The court decision established limited organizational standing for animal welfare groups in cases involving specific animals facing imminent harm, where traditional regulatory enforcement proved inadequate. The ruling created important precedent while maintaining appropriate limitations that addressed judicial concerns about litigation expansion and procedural manageability. The standing precedent generated significant interest from animal welfare organizations throughout the United States, who recognized opportunities for pursuing legal action in cases where traditional approaches had proven ineffective. The Foundation received numerous consultation requests from organizations seeking guidance on developing cases that met the established standing requirements while advancing meaningful animal welfare improvements. The combination of trust law and standing precedents established foundation for comprehensive animal welfare jurisprudence that recognized animal interests within existing legal frameworks, while providing practical mechanisms for protecting those interests through judicial processes. The achievements demonstrated that innovative legal thinking could advance animal protection through evolutionary rather than revolutionary approaches to legal development. The judicial innovation work also created opportunities for academic collaboration with law schools that were establishing animal welfare law clinics and research programs. The Foundation's successful precedent development provided practical examples of effective advocacy strategies while contributing to academic understanding of animal welfare legal theory and practice. The academic collaborations included development of comprehensive casebook materials that documented successful animal welfare litigation strategies while providing theoretical framework for continued legal development. The educational materials enhanced law school curricula while building academic support for expanded animal welfare legal education and research. The foundation also established judicial education programs that provided continuing legal education credits for judges who were encountering animal welfare cases, but lacked specialized knowledge about relevant legal concepts and scientific developments. The programs enhanced judicial understanding of animal welfare issues while building relationships with court officials who possessed authority to shape legal precedent through their decisions. During this period of judicial innovation focus, the Foundation achieved another significant precedent through successful constitutional challenge to statutory provisions that exempted certain commercial animal operations from basic animal welfare requirements. The case represented the Foundation's most ambitious constitutional litigation to date, involving fundamental challenges to legislative frameworks that permitted systematic animal suffering through regulatory exemptions. The constitutional challenge emerged from documentation of severe animal welfare violations at commercial egg production facilities that maintained legal compliance with agricultural exemption statutes, while subjecting animals to conditions that would constitute criminal cruelty if applied to other animal categories. The exemptions prevented enforcement action despite clear evidence of preventable animal suffering that violated contemporary understanding of animal welfare requirements. The constitutional strategy incorporated equal protection arguments that challenged arbitrary distinctions between different animal categories combined with due process claims that legislative exemptions violated constitutional requirements for rational policy development. The arguments required sophisticated constitutional analysis while maintaining connection to established legal principles that courts could implement without dramatic expansion of judicial authority. The equal protection analysis demonstrated that statutory exemptions for certain commercial animal operations created arbitrary distinctions that violated constitutional requirements for rational policy development. Animals possessed similar capacity for suffering regardless of their commercial use, suggesting that exemptions based solely on economic considerations violated equal protection principles that required rational relationship between legal classifications and legitimate governmental interests. The due process arguments incorporated contemporary scientific understanding of animal cognition and suffering to demonstrate that legislative exemptions permitted preventable harm without adequate justification. The constitutional framework required legislative decisions to reflect contemporary factual understanding rather than outdated assumptions, suggesting that exemptions based on obsolete concepts of animal capacity violated due process requirements. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.